Good evening and welcome to the school board meeting for January 12th, 2010. I made my first mistake today and I wrote 2009, so I have to learn. If I can ask the superintendent to please take the roll call.
Ann Mayer?
Here.
Lisa Sweet?
Here.
Dexter Legg?
Here.
Carol Chelman?
Here.
Rebecca Emerson?
Here.
Ann Walker?
Here.
Mitch Schuldman?
Here.
Kent LePage?
Here.
Tom Martin? Leslie Stevens?
Here.
Linda Brulette?
Here.
Philip Boynton?
Here. Very good. If I could ask everyone to rise, have a moment of silent reflection, and then join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Stephen, you could start us then.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes for December 1st, 2009.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any comments, corrections? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion for accept the minutes of December 8th, 2009.
Approved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Yes.
On those, on the last page, item number 4, the Portsmouth High School turf fields will be done in the summer or during the summer of 2010, not for the summer of 2010.
They will be done during the summer.
Yeah, during the summer.
It won't be done before the summer.
It will be done for the summer,
Okay.
during the summer.
Okay. Any other corrections, comment? Okay. With that change, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Anybody sign the public commentary sheet for tonight? No? Okay, so we'll bypass that and move right on to a special presentation tonight by the superintendent, Mr. Ed McDonough, to talk about his entry plan.
Good evening. The chair and vice chair have asked that in lieu of what was an originally scheduled budget presentation this evening, that I provide you, as well as the folks at home viewing, a brief overview of my entry plan report. I'm grateful to the school board for supporting this process, as I have found it to be a rewarding and invaluable experience. It's provided me a great opportunity to learn about the Portsmouth schools and its proud traditions. As you recall, the rationale for developing an entry plan was in large measure a device intended to let the new superintendent gain a strong understanding about the Portsmouth schools and the Portsmouth community. The process of asking questions of individuals in small groups provided a systematic way to learn about the district and, of course, allowed participants to get to know me. Throughout, I used a set of questions, the same set of questions that allowed me to listen and record people's ideas, their impressions, and their expectations. I have said, and I think it bears repeating here tonight, that while I offer an entry plan report, i.e. a product, the feedback I've collected during the initial 5 months, the process and the opportunity to meet so many folks, I think has been what's been valuable to me. I think it's been the process for 5 months rather than perhaps the product. Although I did promise one, and so I do present one. And suffice to say that I think the journey over these past 5 months of collecting data and meeting various folks has been every bit as important as the end. But the plan did permit me to collect an incredible amount of information. I interviewed over 70 folks individually. I spent a day at each one of the schools where I was able to meet with small groups of teachers and staff. I attended PTO meetings, I surveyed parents, and I interviewed student council members at the high school. And so I would like to publicly thank all of those who participated and were so gracious with their time and honest and candid feedback. Participants, all conversations were asked three key frames. Essentially, first, what did participants see as the strengths and accomplishments of the district? In other words, what do they brag about? Or perhaps what do they want to see most preserved here in the Portsmouth School District? And second, what did they see as the priorities and challenges facing the district? And finally, because I had the opportunity, I would ask them for some advice and ask them to share what expectations they had for the new superintendent of schools. A copy of the written entry report will be emailed to all members of the school community, and a copy will be posted on the district's website. Readers will note that the report is organized into three broad categories. First, the report captures the general feedback that I collected regarding strengths and priorities for the district. Second, I used 10 broad categories associated with school systems, such as policy and governance or business operations, in order to classify much of the information I had and to organize it. In certain instances, it was my own observations, but in large measure, it was a kind of a collection of themes that ran throughout all the interviews I had conducted. When appropriate, I offered a recommendation, which is intended to be a starting point for board conversation. And then finally, the report is organized all the data that I had. We had expectations, we had cultural norm survey that I used and administered at each of the schools, and then finally all the parent survey data. The process evidenced three clear strengths. Regardless of the group that I interviewed, respondents believed that the number one strength of the district is the quality and dedication of the school staff. They truly see that as its core strength. Words and phrases used by participants to describe the staff were, and I mean administrators, teachers, support staff, everyone who works in the district, were words like committed, progressive, focused on the whole child, kids always come first, highly professional, phenomenal, and that they're all open to new ideas. All spoke to the dedication of staff to go above and beyond to meet the needs of any child in his or her classroom. And when I asked families to rate the quality of the staff, out of the 380 families who responded to the survey, over 95% of them rated the teacher quality as either favorable or highly favorable. The number two strength of the district that emerged is the wide range of programming that's available to students. One interviewee, who shall remain nameless but might be here this evening, had stated that whether it be career and technical education, music, sports, or the arts, there was always a reason to come to school here in the Portsmouth schools, that there's something for everybody on a daily basis. Repeatedly, members would cite one or more of the programs listed on this slide as examples of the wide range of programs and how proud they were of these offerings here in the district. When parents were asked to rate the quality, not the wide range of programming, 63% of parents rated it favorably and 22% rated it as highly favorable, a significant degree of satisfaction with the quality of the programming in the district. And then similarly, when we were asked to rate they were asked to rate the quality of the district's extra and co-curricular offerings, 55% of the folks rated it favorably, and 31% see the quality of our activities for our students as highly favorable. The third strength of the district, identified by a large majority of respondents, is the strong support and pride in the community for its public schools. While many noted the changing demographics, specifically that fewer and fewer households in Portsmouth have school-aged children, most spoke proudly that there is strong support for the school district, that public education is valued, that it's a top priority, and it's a focal point here in the community. Many spoke with great pride and shared personal and wonderful anecdotes about their own children, their neighbors' children, or even going back further here in the schools, and how strongly the schools have been supported here. In short, I think people believe in the strength and the quality of the school system. Now, when asked to talk about priorities and challenges, there was much more variability. To be sure, as folks were interviewed over the course of the past 5 months, some priorities, for example, such as the need to bond the middle school. Those issues have been resolved. The list presented here represents those challenges identified most frequently. You can see that the list ranges from addressing our infrastructure to improving communication and relationships with various constituencies, to maintaining, if not restoring, some programming. And from a teacher perspective, the one thing that emerged in the lower right-hand side was this need to perhaps get more focused with our district initiatives. Not necessarily critical, but perhaps make connections between them, and I think they spoke very highly and favorably about the professional learning communities that have emerged in the district. The bulk of the report comprises some 68 observations and 26 recommendations. As I noted earlier, they're organized around those 10 broad categories that you see here on this slide. But it's far too much, I think, to cover or even attempt to cover and address in this evening's presentation. But I would encourage citizens to access the report online to see the details. Clearly, some recommendations can be accomplished rather painlessly, and in fact, many are already underway by this in the last 4 or 5 months. But still others, I think, will serve as a jumping-off point for discussion, as they will require significant time, careful planning, and significant resources in order to accomplish. Along the way, I asked for, and I received, very happily, a great deal of advice. The column on the left hand of this slide captures the flavor of some of the advice that was typically offered. Lead, be supportive, communicate, keep smiling, listen, don't be afraid to move the district forward, be open, honest, straightforward. When participants identified action words from a list of some 30 verbs, the 2 top action words that most clearly rose to the top from the school community were listen and support. And the key actions selected by board and community members were to prioritize, prepare, and build. So again, I want to thank everyone who assisted me along the way. Since July, I too have been impressed with the quality and caliber of the staff. Moreover, the citizens, you, the school board, city councilors, citizens, parents, folks who came in, I think they truly have a strong belief and only want to see the district continue to improve. So from my perspective, the community has been incredibly welcoming, kind, and supportive, and I'm very appreciative of this. And so in conclusion, while the report begins with the successes and highlights of the district, the report is also intended to mark a shift from entry to transition. As such, the report is intended to reinforce and help set the stage for the organization's planning process. To be sure, there are many challenges ahead and opportunities ahead as well. Renovating the middle school, addressing the infrastructure needs of our K-5 schools, integrating 21st century technology into our classrooms, and hiring and retaining quality teachers are but a few of the challenges we have in delivering upon our mission. And however, while it's important to develop plans to address facilities, funding, technology, and alike, we must remain focused on the mission to educate all of our children to high levels. At the end of the day, it will always be about student learning and high levels of achievement for each and every learner. And so I'm happy to report that all of the challenges notwithstanding, the district enjoys an incredibly strong, dedicated staff focused on student learning. I'm excited and thankful for the opportunity I have that you've provided me, and I think through professional learning community processes, through the dedication of the staff, and with the strong continued support of the community, I think the district is poised to take those next steps and ensure continuous improvement for each learner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you entertain a few questions?
Be happy to.
If anybody has any. Dexter Kent.
Yeah, I don't say this, Ed, to flatter you, but
Oh, go ahead. I'm kidding.
you don't know what I'm going to say. In my mind, this reaffirms, again, why we hired you. It just demonstrates sort of a data and fact-driven approach, a strong methodology, someone willing to listen and then put plans in place. So although for me, I didn't learn much from this process, I learned a lot about you. And so it was insightful for me, and I really appreciate what you did.
Thank you.
Kent.
And I too want to thank you for bringing forth, you know, a snapshot of where you are at this time and going from transition to true entry. And God knows, I think on Thursday night when we sit down in this chamber with everybody, you'll learn a lot about the politics and outcoming of it, because budget season is where we test a lot. One of the things that caught me on this graph, and I think I brought it up to you the last time when you briefed us on this, and I meant to follow up with you, is under the graph number 2, where you do favorable and unfavorable. What sticks out to me, and I do this in my own business, and in fact I ran graphs very similar to this at Federal Express as an analyst, is I don't care about favorable and highly favorable. Where I get scared, and I think it's a lot higher than I would like to see, is the 12% of unfavorable. 12% to me is an unacceptable mark, and the graph is not breaking down what is unfavorable. So, you know, something I'd like to see back, and I know this is a very busy time, but board members may be willing to help you out. I want to know what people are unfavorable about. I don't like seeing that in the double digits. I would have been unhappy at it at 6%, quite honestly. So to cut that in half is something. I know you can't please everybody. I mean, I've done in many jobs everything to try to keep somebody happy, and there is not always a possibility it's seldom to get that 100%. But I don't know if you have any input about that 12%, or is that an assignment you see yourself or giving to the
Well,
to
perhaps
the
it's the
academics?
fault of the question just asks folks to generally rate the quality of the academic programming. There were opportunities for parents, and I have all that backup data where they could write their individual comments about, you know, and so there's a whole wealth of information, individual comments, where you could kind of parse some of that out. I didn't really delve into, you know, looking at those comments to find a theme about that. I was really impressed that 85% of people see it as quality programming for their children.
Yeah, and I like that, but it's 12%.
Yeah, well,
to me is high.
Yeah.
And it took me by surprise the last time, and seeing it again, it's like, oh yeah, what can we do as a school community to cut that in half?
Right. We can take another bite of the apple and explore deeper, I think, sure.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you for your time.
Sure.
Appreciate it. We'll give the superintendent a second to sit. He mentioned early, just when he made his beginning comment about the entry plan, that we were supposed to have a budget presentation tonight, but I just want the community to know that we're having that on the 19th, which is next Tuesday. We just thought it would be a nice idea not to have a budget presented to us before we had a chance to sit down with the City Council and the Fire and the Police Commission. And then the hearing that was scheduled for the 19th has been pushed off to the 21st, because we also didn't think it would be a good idea to have a public hearing necessarily without anybody going to have a chance to take a look at the budget. So that's where we are, which just makes our time frame a little tighter. But. Okay. Moving on to the superintendent's report.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, in your packet you received the January copy of Board and Administrator, highlighting tips for more effective board service, among other items, a copy of the elementary lunch menu for the month. In order to provide some context for the first reading of some of the policies you have before you tonight, I provided an article that explains why policies such as alternative learning plans and extended learning opportunities are required by law. I've also included a number of items related to the FY11 budget process, specifically the agenda for Thursday's meeting of the whole, materials provided to departments regarding the 10-year CPI average, retirement and health insurance costs, rates for next year, and the materials that are outlining the major capital improvements on the school side that will be presented to the planning board for their adoption on January 21st. And then you also received from the chair the school board committee assignments for the next 2 years.
If I could just make one quick comment on the committee assignments, actually two. One is, I think not everybody totally understood followed the same procedure in terms of filling out their preferences as the instructions at the top of that page that we sent out. stated. So I just want it to be as fair as possible and made sure that everyone, that at least every member sits on at least one standing committee. Because had we followed the way certain people had filled it out, some people would not have been on a standing committee. So, and the other thing I just wanted to say is, since we're talking about committee assignments, and Sherry Garrity was the representative for the, on the Joint Building Committee for the middle school, I have asked, and she's accepted, Leslie Stevens to be the next the representative on that board. Okay.
Question?
Oh, yes, sir.
Under, and it kind of, I didn't know whether we're taking action on this or not tonight. When it comes to the committees,
Okay.
I'm not sure how, and again, under JBC, where that was not even listed in regards to committee sign-up. So I know I didn't have an interest. I know we had 2 new board members, and I don't know if there's any other past board members that had an interest in why that was not listed to put down as a reference. And again, I'd just like an explanation on that and maybe some discussion.
Well, I think basically because I had thought about who I was interested in asking to be on it, as opposed to just seeing who was interested in being on it.
Yeah, but
so it was my choice.
past policy, past practice is that those would be an assigned type, and again, a pool of people would be able to be chosen from. And it doesn't seem like that was the process in which this was done.
Well, when the Joint Building Committee...
And I want to just make a statement, not that, I mean, I think Leslie's highly qualified and is there.
Sure. When the...
I didn't guarantee.
When the initial Joint Building Committee was formed, we didn't go through that process either. It was just according to the way the board policies are set up, the chair gets to appoint the members of the committee. So when we went around, when we first formed this Joint Building Committee, there wasn't a list that was sent around asking people who's interested in serving on the Joint Building Committee.
But there was a request per minutes on that meeting when the JBC was formed. Anybody interested would then get a hold of you and ask you. And I know there were people that had asked, you know.
People did talk to me.
Right, because that's how it was. It was presented that if you were interested, to get a hold of you.
Board members did express
and
their
whether it's
interest.
verbal or whether it's written, there is procedure there to ensure that everybody has a chance to request their preferences of their committees.
And board members did request, did contact me personally. There were board members who had asked me personally.
Prior to the meeting that we had last week, prior to whether we knew whether, you know, this was the procedure in which we wanted to
People had
follow?
contacted me about their interest and let me know of their interest to be a member of the Joint Building Committee.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess I, as a new member, just would ask for clarification on what is our policy and where is that policy written?
For committees?
Speaking to what was just said,
For committees.
with respect to all committees, but particularly with respect to a statutory creation such as the Joint Building Committee, which is unique to amongst the committees that there's possible appointment to. And I don't know if we need to have, we need, legal opinion regarding that, but I think that the Joint Building Committee is a unique committee, and it's a statutory creation. And I would be concerned, not, as Ken said, also, not being concerned with who you're appointing, but just with respect to the process, and that the process be conducted in a way that is absolutely 100% consistent with the law regarding the Joint Building Committee. And so I'd be curious what our policy is with respect to, and what legally we're required to do. And then also committees in general, being a new member, I would be curious what our policy is on committees, appointments to committees, and where that would be found.
It would be found in, I don't have it with me tonight, the policy handbook under board issues within there. And I don't even remember the exact date where that comes from, but it basically states that the chairman of the board has the authority to appoint all committees. Doesn't make any distinction between joint building committees with the city, For example, the library position, the rec board, those are city committees of which the school board has one representative on it. And according to the policy, the chair gets to choose all the members of the committee. Now, that's the way it's been for long before I came on the board. If at some point in time the board would like to readdress that question, that's a whole other story. But right now, that's, if you look at the policy book, that's where it states. Dexter, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry.
No, I was looking at the state statute, and I thought it may be in there, and it's not. So it must be in our policy as well as the city charter, because in both instances.
It is in the city
In
charter.
both instances, the city council and the school board took the exact same approach in appointing members to this committee, which were the mayor and the school board chair.
Right. And the actual number makeup of the joint building committee was a mutual decision between the mayor and myself. So there's equal numbers of each of those two parties. So it could have been 4 and 4, 3 and 3, but we felt 3 and 3 plus the opportunity to have 3 members of the community on there as well. And so essentially it worked out. He chose 3, the school board chose 3. We each chose 1, and then we agreed on 1, which is the library director, Mary Ann List. So, okay. So, moving on to district reports. We have some principals of the elementary schools here tonight. Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to see you all sitting there. Mr. Grossman.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I just want to start off tonight just highlighting a couple of recent past events at Little Harbor, as well as an upcoming event. Back on November 15th, the Little Harbor community put on a fundraiser with the famous band Kryptonite Jones, and we raised over $2,000 for a Little Harbor parent who is going to need a heart transplant. We had over 100 people show up. We had a lot of teachers involved in the planning and in the execution that night, as well as a number of parent volunteers. We had a lot of families there. The kids got up on the stage. It was a great event, and it was something nice to do for a family in our community. And then also something else that we did shortly before the holidays, Gina Conley, our music teacher, we actually had a number of caroling events planned, but typically our students walk to those events, and the bitter cold put the kibosh on a lot of these things. The one place that we were able to go to was the Wentworth home. We've had an ongoing relationship with them, and the kids went and caroled to the residents there. They brought cards and candy, and again, just a nice way to reach out to the community. The kids love it, and I think the people at the Wentworth home enjoyed it as well. And then coming up on January 28th, we have our barn dance, which is an annual event. It's put on by the Wellness Committee. It's supported by the PTA. We actually have a couple of callers who come in. I know I expect Mrs. Briolette to be do-si-doing on that particular evening while I watch. But it's a very popular event, and really it's one of the events where it's just to get people together, have a good time, and maybe promote some healthy habits as well. My presentation tonight on a professional learning community at Little Harbor, when I met with the other elementary principals, we decided to take the approach of highlighting one particular team at each of our schools. And so I wanted to talk about our third grade team and the work that they've done actually over the past 2 years, because I think that the work they've done over the 2 years really kind of is a good example of how engaged the teachers are in this work. And so as you see on your handout, there are 4 classroom teachers on this PLC team, and then there's also a special education teacher who works along with them. And in the 2008-2009 school year, the power standards had recently been created in Portsmouth, focusing on the essential information that the district leaders and school staff really decided the kids needed to know. And so the third grade team the school team set about on the project of aligning the everyday math curriculum, which is the program that the elementary schools use in math, with the newly created Power Standards. And once they had done so, what they did was that during each unit of everyday math, they created a pre-test to measure where the students were in terms of their mastery of that particular Power Standard at the beginning of the unit, and then a post-test to measure how much they had learned over the course of that unit, again, measuring the Power Standard itself. And they did that as they went through the year. And then what they did, based on what they learned from the pre and post tests, was they grouped the kids according to their performance. So students who had achieved a higher degree of mastery of those concepts were then put into groups where they kind of extend their learning. Students who had had more difficulty with the concepts were put together in groups where they could master the basic concepts and then possibly move up into a group as their understanding progressed. And I just have to say it as a side, I had a parent meeting today, a Title I coffee, and I just by coincidence, I was mentioning a presentation tonight, and a few parents were there whose students were in 3rd grade last year, and they just raved about this and talked about how excited their kids were because the work was just right for them. You know, they either were able to learn concepts at their own pace, or they were really able to be challenged and kind of move ahead and do things that they didn't think they'd have the opportunity to do. So in planning for their professional learning community work this year, what the 3rd grade team did was to look at their work the previous year and look at how the students had performed on the Power Standards and try to identify a logical area on which to do their PLC work this year. And the subject which they chose was fact fluency or fact automaticity, the ability of the students to very quickly and effortlessly recall math facts, whether it's subtraction, addition, or multiplication. And so they are continuing with the model of pre- and post-testing students and grouping them for instruction. But as they create those groups, they're also doing pre- and post-testing for math fact fluency. And so you can see I included just a basic table here that shows the different classrooms and how during each of the units they've performed in addition fact fluency, subtraction fact fluency, and then a variety of multiplication fluency tasks. And I guess the one thing that maybe isn't in here that I'd like to emphasize is, first of all, they're not analyzing this just by group. They're also analyzing this by individual student. So they have data sheets on every individual student, how each student is doing in terms of their fluency. And I think one of the great successes of this model is that you have a team of teachers who aren't just responsible for their own class and not just sort of working on their own, but they're working as a group, sharing their knowledge, sharing their students, and really in the end they end up taking kind of a collective responsibility for that entire grade level. And so I think they're able to accomplish more than they would on their own. And as they go through the year, they're often changing which groups they take. So one teacher at one point may be taking a higher group, and another teacher may be taking a lower group, but as the year progresses on, that can change. And I think it's really the nature of the group effort, I think, results in a much more powerful teaching model than if they were all working on their own in their individual classrooms. Thank you.
Great. Any questions? Yes, Ann.
A comment more than a question. Everyday Math is such a huge, vast program that I'm really delighted that they were developing Power Standards and also the pre and post tests, but most especially to then go on and be grouping them for growth and for success.
Yeah, the team's really, it's a remarkable effort that they've done, I have to say. I had to be reined in terms of the amount of information I would like to have brought here about it. I could go on and on, but they've done some amazing work, and tying the 2 years together has been very, very impressive.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have one quick question.
Yes.
Could you take maybe 30 seconds? I had a little difficulty really sort of understanding some of the columns on this chart.
Sure. So if we look at the top table, right. This was the first data collection that the 3rd grade team had done. And so if you look down that left-hand column, that's the class. So you have Charlotte Bernstein's class 3B, 3F, 3M, 3R, the 4 third grade classes. Okay? And their goal here for math fluency is that 80% of third graders will score 90% or above in fluency by the end of third grade. If we look across the top of that table, you see, so that would be fluency for addition, fluency for subtraction, fluency in multiplying times 0 and times 1, which are grouped together, and so forth down the line. And then the last column, which I was initially uncertain of, is how many students in multiplication, if you look at all the multiplication, were 90% or above in all the multiplication categories. And so you see some spaces and so forth here, and that is due to, as they go through units, they get a baseline in terms of assessing their skills at the very beginning of the year, but they hadn't actually taught multiplication yet. That continued to be true in that November 12th data, so they don't have any multiplication data in there. And then on December 16th, they started to teach multiplication, and so they have some data in that table.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Charlie. Very good.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
George?
Hi. It's really been a fantastic year of learning so far at New Franklin. As we enter into this new year, everyone's sort of shaking off their post-holiday haze, and we're delving deep into learning again. Just a few notables of things that are going on in school at this time. One of our grade 5 classes is conducting a juice pouch upcycling program. Upcycling is the act of turning something not that useful into something useful, but keeping it pretty whole. I have a specimen that I brought. It's an upcycled tie. I couldn't muster the courage to wear this on television tonight, but I have worn it around school a little bit. This was made by a staff member. But they collect the pouches throughout the school and send them into a group called TerraCycle, who turns them into real products. In addition, another 5th grade activity is this, you may have seen some of this, these Greek mythology calendars, which proceeds from this that they made and wrote a piece on each Greek god or element. Proceeds from this benefit the New Hampshire and the NHSBCA. Somewhat ominously, the year begins with Hades, but I'm told that makes mythological sense because he's a harbinger of winter. So let's see. In addition, we've just launched the 2nd session of our after-school math enrichment program, which started this week. That after-school program, which is funded by our PTO, as well as the AMP program that's headed up by Joy Bryan Markley, and which utilizes high school in-service students. That program's already benefited over 75 kids in our school this year, so we're really happy with that. On Friday, one of our 2nd grade classrooms is launching their Pennies for Priests program, which is designed to promote education and literacy in impoverished areas in Pakistan and Afghanistan. So we're looking forward to seeing how that plays out. As far as our PLC work goes, we've really started to click on this year. I feel like we've got our momentum. Our learning teams meet weekly to develop assessments, to analyze data, and to plan interventions for students not meeting the designated learning targets. Mr. Grossman has shared some examples of the data pieces and how that might look like to you. But I just wanted to take a little moment to discuss how we work with and respond to that data, because there's a few examples of that in your packet. We've explored many different data analysis protocols and have tried different things for different data sets. Because at first glance, the data analysis seems like a really simple task. However, once you get beyond the mere averages at the bottom of the column, you realize that each data set tells a story about learners, it tells a story about instruction, about curriculum, and we've spent a great deal of time during our late starts and our regular weekly meetings dissecting these data sets. There's a great Rick DeFord quote that you have to torture the data until it confesses. And we spend a lot of time really squeezing it so that we can leverage learning in the best way possible. So after the data analysis protocol, we develop a response plan that takes the form of a targeted SMART goal. I think there's also some specimens of that, SMART goals in your packets.
The SMART goals that you see there are the short-term SMART goals that are in response to the common assessments. So they may run over a cycle of a month or a month and a half. In addition to those, we have year-round goals for each team, most of which at New Franklin are centered around written and verbal expression of math understanding and concepts. So after the SMART goals are established, the teams implement the plan and evaluate their progress in their weekly meetings. After the intervention period and the enrichment period that Charlie mentioned, the teams reflect on the process, and I think it's a really important part to celebrate and team and student achievement, and to look at what worked, what didn't. So we look for areas for improvement, and we develop learning plans that are very specific for students who weren't able to master the material during the initial round of intervention. And I'm pleased to report that we have had a great deal to celebrate. While we're continuously making adjustments to the process, the student results and the staff response has been extremely positive. Most of our work is centered around math for the past 2 years, but this spring we're looking to turn our lens with this process towards reading, and we're very excited about that and the process in general. That's all I have about professional learning communities at New Franklin, but I would also like to just mention a couple upcoming events that you're welcome to come to. We'll have our second family math games night on February 4th from 5 to 6:30 at the Gosling Meadows Recreation Center. Also from February 8th through 12th, our PTO Funds and Artist in Residence. This year it will be Jeff Irwin from Trash Can Lids Production, where he will help kids turn junk into funk as they explore the science of recycling through rhythm. So we're really looking forward to that. So thank you for your time tonight, and I'll take any questions.
Any questions? I have one just quick question.
Sure.
So I'm just curious, and I guess this would be for all elementary principals. So for example, would the third grade, since Little Harbor used third grade, goal at Little Harbor be different than a third grade goal at New Franklin when it comes to math power standards?
The power standards are the same. However, the goals are informed by the assessment. So you're looking at a specific group of learners in a specific grade level in a classroom. And our teams do work together, and I'm a big believer, like Charlie said, that the we is smarter than the me. And so in a particular area, they may find some deficiency at Little Harbor in double-digit subtraction, whereas at New Franklin, in that place and time, it may have shown up as double-digit addition. And while the ultimate end goals and the power standards are all the same, specific rounds of intervention may focus on different things based on what we're seeing in this student data.
Right. So that's 80% of third graders scoring 90% above might be different at New Franklin.
It might.
Okay.
Yes, Carol.
Is the data look the same from school to school, or does it vary?
Do you mean outcomes or the way that we report
Outcomes, yeah.
In terms of the actual power standards and how we measure, most of the one little tricky thing is that we've been playing with the assessments. A lot of our assessments are common, but because pacing is different between some different teachers, and we try and coordinate it by grade level, but it's a little bit difficult to coordinate pacing through schools. We may develop our common assessments and deliver them at different times, and therefore you may see different mixes of items that are being assessed or different standards. So I don't think it is in here, but different grade levels have said we're going to assess this power standard, this power standard, and this power standard. They may not be sequential at this time because of the way it's aligned within everyday mathematics, because everyday mathematics doesn't adhere its sequence to our power standard sequence.
So if we're trying to show that our students are learning at a high level and we're very successful, will we be able to use outcomes from this to prove that, to show that?
Absolutely. And those are something we could aggregate across schools, I imagine, but we haven't done that yet.
Okay.
Any other
Thank
questions?
you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year.
Same to you.
I'd like to just start by highlighting a few events that are going on at Don Darrow School, or have gone on since the first of the year. Last Friday night, we had our first ever family movie night. Our PTA purchased a site license so that we can legally show some of the great movies that are out there that families love to watch. We had over 200 people come to Don Darrow School on Friday night to watch the movie Up. The kids came in their pajamas with their sleeping bags. Parents brought their lawn chairs. It was a nice thing to be sitting in January. And we shared some popcorn and some snacks and enjoyed a night together. That's the first of many. The next one is coming up in February, cloudy with a chance of meatballs. This coming Friday, I invite you to our annual assembly in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. It's at 2 o'clock in the cafeteria at Don Darrow School. Our fourth graders will recite I Have a Dream, a poem for choral speaking by Joan Nichols. It's a very powerful and moving assembly that dates back to when Ann Walker was a fourth grade teacher at Don Darrow School, and you are all welcome to attend. It's a great tradition that's continued. I'd like to take a few minutes to discuss the work of PLCs, professional learning communities at Don Darrow School. We have grade level PLCs, subject-specific PLCs, and some cross-responsibility groupings as well. Most of them meet weekly, but I'd like to talk tonight specifically about our second grade PLC team and their work this year. And I'd like to speak about it in reference to our response to intervention framework, which is a pyramid of interventions that is guiding our work as we proceed through helping these children meet our grade level goal of improved student reading achievement, as well as our school goal. Tier 1 in our pyramid of interventions is strong classroom teaching. It's the regular education, and we have spent some time this fall providing professional development opportunities for our teachers and paraprofessionals during our late start mornings. Excuse me. Some of these topics include small group instruction and effective shared reading strategies. Children receive reading instruction every day for 45 to 60 minutes, depending on the grade level. In Tier 2, our interventions target specific student needs. So if you look at the chart that I provided for you in your packets, you will notice that this is just one of our 4 second grade classes. In the first column is the student number, just to identify without providing personal information. But the first main column of data shows you our fall 2009 DRA data. Every student in second grade is administered the Developmental Reading Assessment, or DRA, at least twice a year. The DRA measures fluency and comprehension as well as other reading skills. At the start of second grade, students are expected to be reading at a level 18. You will notice on the chart that I have highlighted the students that did not make that start of second grade benchmark. When we had this data, which is much more than a number, we had several meetings including classroom teachers, reading specialists, Title I staff, resource teachers, and speech pathologists to really look at the needs of these second grade children. After several meetings, we decided to create 8 different intervention groups. You can see their titles in the column titled Tier 2 Intervention. Those groups ranged in number of students from 6 to 16. The enrichment group was rather large, and they met 4 times a week for 6 weeks for 30 minutes. This is in addition to their Tier 1 reading instruction. You can see the variety of interventions that were provided to this particular group of second graders and an assessment of their progress. Simultaneously, there are some students in every class who will need a Tier 3 intervention. This is above and beyond Tier 1, regular education, Tier 2, intervention, and it's needed for those students who are significantly below or have other educational challenges. You will note it in this class, as they had 4 students who required a Tier 3 intervention. So at the end of our 6-week intervention block, and we had this wonderful data showing so much gain in our second grade students, we just couldn't wait till January, when we typically give the mid-year developmental reading assessment to our students who didn't start out the year where we wanted them to. So our PLC team decided to give a Rigby benchmark, which is just a different assessment, very similar to the DRA, to see how the carryover in skills learned was, because it's one thing to learn how to decode a word, and it's another thing to be able to do it when you're actually reading. So you can see in this particular group that of the students who did not make the benchmark in the fall, and when they had the intervention in the spring, most of those children now are at the December benchmark of 20, which is pretty nice to see that the hard work of this particular PLC group they have a lot to celebrate. And the children have worked hard as well as the staff. If we were to look more broadly at second grade, we have cut the number of students who did not meet the fall benchmark in half by December. So this is a lot to celebrate at Dondero School. And this is just one grade level, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Any questions? Becca.
So this is great. So it seems that student 1 went from a proficiency of 8 and they more than doubled to a 21?
That's correct.
Okay, that's wonderful.
It's actually reading just a little bit higher than expected, at a higher level.
That's great. And the Rigby and the DRA are comparable? I mean, they're...
Yes.
Okay.
Not identical, but comparable.
Okay, but you feel that you're using these two different, you're still getting a really good benchmark on where these kids are?
Yes, and we'll confirm it because later this month we start the DRA with this grade level.
Okay, and then at some point, are you going to transition or include mathematics? Like
Yes.
right now, New Franklin's doing math and we'll move into the reading and writing.
It's pretty much a similar flip-flop because we're looking at thinking about math this spring. We've just started with our math interventionist / coach, Dr. Tracy Rush. She just started here after just before the first of the year, and we're talking math a lot more than we have, but we have some significant reading needs at our school. Mm-hmm. And we're really looking forward to seeing how the interventions K-5 have made a difference this fall.
This is great.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have one quick question. So the DRA is given in the fall and then followed up in the spring?
Yes.
Same grade level?
Every grade level, every student at every grade level receives the DRA in the fall and the spring. And any student who did not meet the fall benchmark at their grade level receives the DRA in January, mid-year, to monitor progress.
And in terms of the Tier 2 interventions, is it staff intensive or is it just in the normal course of what goes on in the classroom?
Now, it's pretty staff intensive because we want to keep the group small.
Right.
It's an additional 30 minutes that's blocked into the schedule. Every grade level has a 30-minute block of time every day. But because of staffing needs and just kid needs, we found that 3 to 4 times a week, if we can do that, we're doing well. And we're working now on our next set of interventions, which are small group instruction in the classroom. It's a little different model than this, but these children are currently receiving additional interventions based on the Rigby data that we received and classroom teacher conference notes.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I was just waiting to make sure everyone got one. Okay. Steve, Mr. Bartlett.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, what I've handed out is a financial narrative for the month end December 2009, which you did have the report in your packet. At this point in time, we're halfway through the fiscal year, but we've had 4 years of student teacher on-site data added to our financial reports. So at this point in time, I'm in a much better position to get the trends and go forward. By and large, the majority of the variances that you see on this report are a result of timing, with the exception of one, for sure. We noted that there is a negative for the dental insurance, and after a little bit of research, we found out that when we pulled the budget numbers from some of the backup data during the budget process, we pulled the wrong number, so actually that was level funded and should have had a slight increase. So that is one where I did make an error. That will be part of the ones that we'll be making up as the year goes along.
Is that delta, I'm sorry, is that delta going to grow, or is that?
It'll end,
about it.
no, it's going to end up at about 20,000 short before the year is
Okay,
over.
thanks.
But I do have, I have identified that and some other areas of concern, and I do have some, as we do every year, we have places where we're short on budget, over on expenses, but we have other places that are just the opposite. And we've worked very hard throughout the year to try to balance one against the other to come out right at the end. With increasing budgetary pressure, that becomes a much more difficult task because our flexibility and certainly is reduced to a large degree. But based on history, given the same factors and being able to identify the trends early, we're usually able to balance everything off through the hard work of the staff, unless we have some other variable or parameter that's thrown in the mix. And so do we have a hole to fill? Yes, we do. The other variable that was thrown into the mix this year was the very, very short, one day after the new year started, notification that the retirement rate was going to go up. So that leaves us with about a $100,000 hole. That's a new variable that doesn't fit in very well with the other pieces. So I've been trying to figure out the best way to cover this, because with some of the other things, like I say, historically we've been able to work with. I discussed a plan with the superintendent, and what I would like to do is institute a soft freeze, not a hard freeze. And what I mean by a soft freeze is that we'll work with the administrators to identify a certain amount of money in each area that we will delay purchases or, if need be, discontinue purchases, but try to pick items that are not, that would not directly influence classroom instruction. And as we get more data under our belt, if other areas where savings could be apparent, if trends continue, then we would be able to release those funds. I think that's far better than a hard freeze where you just go and whack everything, and then it's instant panic and it's very difficult to manage. But I believe that doing this will allow us to identify enough areas to be able to fix this, and hope that some of the other areas will trend and continue to see some savings that we have in the past. If we are able to duplicate the weather from last winter, we could have some savings on the energy side. We've done okay with prices so far. So far, we're if you look at the trending in the plan, we actually are on the right side of that number for the energy expenses. It's going to require a lot of hard work and a lot of diligence on the part of the administrative team. There's no doubt about it. Every year with budgetary pressure, this gets much harder. Is it going to be easy? Is everybody going to be happy? No, but it's something that has to be done. A couple of areas where we always end up having concerns, and one of them, of course, is the maintenance area, because we're always able to have more maintenance needs than we have the ability or the will to fund in a budget year. And in the past, extra maintenance expenses have gone and eaten up savings from other areas, but and most particularly in energy or other building-related areas. Weather-wise, it looks like if this holds, we'll be okay. Right now, we haven't had to access any of the money we set aside for contract plowing. We've been able, storms have been small, so we've been able to handle it ourselves. That would certainly be helpful if that continues. But in the anticipation of this being a tough year, I've sat down with Kenny Lynch and we have outlined a plan with certain thresholds and certain benchmarks that we meet along the way on a monthly basis to make sure that we're going to end up the month, and the year without overexpending or having to go for a supplemental appropriation. A couple of the other areas that I am concerned about, but I still think that we can work with the administrative team and the staff to take care of this. Last year, we did reduce the substitute budget, and it's experienced a lot of pressure. We had the flu and everything else as we usually do. Fortunately, we didn't have a humongous outbreak, so we didn't have anything catastrophic, but there is some pressure there. So we need to work with the administration and do our very best to limit the use of substitutes wherever possible. The same thing with overtime. If it's not an emergency situation, we're going to have to suspend it for the rest of the year, just because we're not going to be able to make up the retirement piece right off quick from other things. But there is some hope that we may be able to do it. If that's the case, we will soften the freeze even further and try to get everybody back to where we started. But we're going to have to reinforce with everybody being very frugal with overtime and substitutes. The other area of concern, of course, always is how we come out of special ed, because that's a constantly moving population and constantly moving needs. Currently, we have a couple of areas where it's going to run over budget, but fortunately, we've been able to do some rearranging, and through the hard work of some of the staff, we've figured out that there is some extra non-area tuition for special education that we had not planned on that will be coming in, that's going to help to keep 207 in good shape, and that'll help us offset the transfer from 165 to 207 and help out 165. That's probably more technical in details than you really want, but in any case, suffice it to say that it's a constantly moving target, and there are a lot of moving pieces, and with everybody's cooperation, and we should be able to make it. So right now, I'm not predicting doom and gloom. I'm just predicting a tough time making it, but we still should make it based on what we've got so far.
Yes, Rebecca and Kent.
I just have a couple questions, we're over with course reimbursement, and I'm just wondering if those were unexpected.
That's timing.
Out-of-district tuition.
Out-of-district tuition, the 165, that's the area where I said we had concerns. But,
Okay.
But as of today, we were able to identify, like I said, the tuition revenue coming in that will help that. So.
Okay, and then why are we under with art, reading, and central office? Is that just timing as well?
Let's see which ones you're talking about.
We're under by 21,000.
We're under
art.
plan.
Yeah, and
again,
is that just timing?
That's timing. I mean,
Okay.
some years, depending on what the curriculum is and what they have for supplies, those things all change. We try to do the plan, like I say, based on multiple year history, but that doesn't hold from year to year.
Okay. And then my last question, you mentioned the snow plowing has been, thankfully, all right this year. And contract plowing, is that something that we put out to bid? Is that something that we're looking at working with the city to ensure we get the best?
Yeah, we go through this every time we come up with this question, and
Well, then you have the answer, so let's
well,
hear it.
I'll give you the same answer that we've had
Please do.
in the past. I mean, there was some questions saying, well, why can't we piggyback on the city?
Right.
And Steve Parkins' response is, sure, I can go and contract it out too, because I don't have enough staff and bill you back for it, or you can go and put it out to bid yourself, which is what we've done.
Okay.
But we've got it worked out so that unless we have major storms, we don't have to use the contract plows.
Okay.
And so we're just keeping our fingers crossed that the storms come during the week and 2 inches at a time.
Thank you.
Ken?
Steve, I know I talked to Ed middle of last week. I think it was last week. Time goes by too fast. First of all, I utterly respect the position you have to take. I don't like the word soft. I don't believe there's such a thing as a soft freeze. I think one looks at that in a large school system, and somebody's going to yell foul on that. I'm beyond concerned, and I'll treat you to any one of the school cafeterias at the end of the year if you make budget. I'm a big spender.
Wow.
I was going to say any restaurant in Portsmouth. I don't see, and I did do a comparison last week actually when I had talked to Ed, and I have not had a chance. I have never seen as many brackets in the over in the history that I've sat here. And at that, the numbers are high. And I know, like you said, it's not a system of your office, it's that we keep getting pushed. You told us the last time when I asked that we came in, I believe, last year we were under $5,000, or we were, what was the number that we came back in last year approximately? It was under 10. And
I
right,
also not many numbers in my head that, history doesn't last long. I'm
right.
sorry.
It was
But
under 10.
It was small, yeah.
It was small.
It was reasonable.
And what you're telling me and telling us all tonight that, and I'm going to go down the lines that I have great concerns with, but I am going to go out of order, is dental insurance, which is now at $11,657, is going to creep up to $20,000. If we were coming in at under $10,000 last year, and by the hair of our chinny chin chin, we all of a sudden are now at least $20,000 behind. I mean, CIP is currently at 18.9 over. So that's one I have a question on.
Can I help you with that a little bit?
Yeah, the CIP one.
When you say from history, and I know you have one of the longest histories of anybody on the board, you got to realize that the format of the report has changed.
Oh, absolutely.
So a negative 5
And
years
that's why I
ago
put in the
on the report
disclaimer.
is not going to look like a negative on this report, because this is not a percentage one. This is based on timing. So if you look at a bracket, then what you also need to do is go over and compare the first column with the next to the last column to see what that is. And what I've outlined is that I agree that there are a number of things that were spent more quickly than they have historically in the past. However, what we're trying to do is implement contingency plans, especially with maintenance, where we know what the benchmarks are, the things they have to do to make sure that the far column on the left doesn't exceed the next to the last column on the right.
And I've taken that well into consideration. That's why I made the statement. It isn't the number of parentheses and overs that I see. It's the dollar amounts that kind of, when you do the comparison side to side, because you're absolutely right. You take, the FY 10,000 budget annual, and you say, okay, where are we on the timing of that? But, CIP, I kind of question that. Paraprofessionals, that I don't have a question, even though it's a high number, because again, we're on the front end, the back end versus the back side of that. We already talked about the tuition. Although I dropped down to special ed, and I think that alone, it kind of goes with, okay, we got that windfall of the little extra money that you didn't know about. It goes with the same statement as, well, the snow plowing. The worst 2 months are yet to come. February and March historically are our highest plowing months, and I don't want to see next year's budget saying, well, we can hope that it doesn't snow or it doesn't get cold. We've got to be better as a board to give you what we need to do. I go down and I look at substitutes, and I know that at the time that this was done through December, $45,789, and I know that today, and I think I appreciate what you're saying is you want to make sure the grants cover that, because I know you had an teacher out today. About 17 of our teachers were attending a math type thing, and I don't know whether grants covered those substitutes or not. But that's why I go with the soft budget, is that I don't think we have the choice at this point to say it's soft. If we have any type of learning for our teachers going on at this time, I don't think we can afford to have the substitutes out there if it is not covered by the grants. That dental insurance one sticks out like a sore thumb, and I know you're dealing with that, and I'm glad that you're saying that the total number be somewhere in the $20,000, because that's it. The disability insurance, that's unusual. That was one that I did look at, but again, that could be the bracket-to-bracket comparison, that we're paying that insurance a little bit differently. And then, we have the maintenance, as you just said, it is the timing to a degree in the year. And we talk about the substitutes, and that miraculously, the second hit of H1N1 is not a fantasy. And I'm hoping with all the clinics that were offered in the last month and a half that our faculty and teachers took advantage of that to make sure that when this comes back in mid-March through April, which is well on the radar screen to happen, we're not out there having to scramble with it. So again, it is not that I take issue with you, and it's not that I take issue with how we came to a budget. I think, again, I've moved from being a little bit scared to downright wanting to make sure that this board does the right thing. And I totally appreciate when you say, we don't need to send out the panic, but it is time to make the decision how hard is a freeze that we can live with and make sure that the children are getting their education, because somewhere, I'll say mid-April, if we're still in this trend, from what I see what you gave us here, we will probably be at the request of having to look at a supplemental budget. And that dental one sticks out. I hope it doesn't come to fruition, but I don't see, I think you're right. If we get no snowstorms in February, you'll have a lot of disappointed kids because there's no snow days. But I think history may prove us to just say, one snowstorm, you can take that and put another $10,000 out the door. And whatever we can do, I think as a board, we need you to do it. Not you personally, but as a system to put that freeze in. Again, I think I have issue just with the word soft. I think you need to say it's a freeze and make sure everybody is doing what we need to. Thank you.
Dexter. So a question and a comment, and I guess I should know this, Steve, but could you explain again to me the additional $100,000 in retirement expense? Why, if I understand what you're saying, it's $100,000 more than what we had budgeted for when we put this budget together in June.
Correct.
And could you just tell me why it's $100,000 more?
Because they increased the percentage, they increased the rate. So the salaries as existing, we budgeted for
35% drop to 30, and it'll go to 25 next year.
Yeah, so it was
an adjustment by the
So it
state
changed on a
legislature.
calendar year, not in a fiscal year?
started with the fiscal year. They told us.
But they didn't tell us
They told us
until-
the last day of June that effective with payrolls tomorrow, your rate is now 9.16. And
But they told us, I'm trying to understand, they told us that after we put this budget
Oh, yeah,
together.
no, they told us on June
Okay.
30th of 2009
Got it.
that as any payroll after July 1st, that it was going to be a different rate.
All right, understood. I should have
I
remembered
mean, even
that,
if they told us in May, we still would have been in trouble, so.
because our budget was already set. So my comment is in a way, I'll echo what Kent is saying, is that we have a very lean budget, and we knew that going in. And I applaud you and the administration for managing it very aggressively now, because if we wait, then you have no ability to hit budget. And I believe it's paramount that we hit budget. And so I would encourage you and the administration to do what is necessary Obviously, within our guidelines and what we're trying to accomplish in the school system, to continue to manage this very aggressively and come in on plan. And to the extent that you need the board guidance on that to help you, then I would ask you to just ask. In other words, if you believe you need to take specific actions to get there and you need to do it now, I would argue that you have the board support to do that, but bring it up to the board and ask.
Lisa, Kent, and Ann.
And piggybacking on that, I know that you will work with administration to, freeze the expenses that have the least impact on direct instruction. But should it begin to impact instruction, I think the board should be informed of that as well.
Absolutely.
For sure.
We had Ann next.
No, she was letting me know that your hand was up.
Following with what Dexter says, in that we do meet pretty much with budgets, but those are non-regular meetings. I'm going to throw a support motion that, because it can go 2 weeks in between, that as long as you're keeping us informed, anything that you think is a cut that may come back to be questioned by us, is that at this point that you do have control on that. So the motion I'm going to put is a support motion that the superintendent and the business administrator be given the support by the board to make sure we do all possible to meet this year's budget, which does include we support the freeze. And that's basically what it comes down to, is that I wouldn't want to have an employee come back to say, well, the board never voted on a freeze. I think we are at that point where we need to make the decision now, not in March, not in April, because as Dexter said, it's going to be too late, that we give you that support, that we support just taking out the word soft, because I don't think we need to put the word hard in either, because a freeze is a freeze, in my opinion. When the Florida orange crop froze this year, it wasn't a partial, it all got frozen. So I'll just throw that out there if I get a second. Again, it's support of the freeze that you are recommending, Steve.
You're no second.
No second.
So, just moving, just a quick question also.
Certainly.
So, the issue of retirement. So, as of July 1st, is what you were saying, we found out after we already set our budget that we have $100,000 more in retirement. And I just want to point out that, the sheet that we received from the city manager this year, so this is, even on top of that, is a $284,000 increase for next year. Is that what that, for retirement? Is that the same pot of money? Right,
I
so it's only
believe,
going to
if I
get
understand what
worse.
you're saying, it's only going to get worse.
It's
That's
only gonna
correct,
get worse.
but we will have the opportunity to budget for it. this
No,
time.
no, I understand.
Other than that, yes, it is worse.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to continue.
Okay. Ann, yes.
Along the same lines, I'm wondering whether or not any of the Race to the Top funding, that $20 to $75 million, do we have any opportunity to request that or get it?
Well, I do know, I say no, I've been told in various meetings that I've been to that the governor of the state of New Hampshire is going to put us in line for that funding as
That's
a
between
as
20
a as a
and
state.
75 million.
As a state. How that filters down to us, it's still an unknown, because quite frankly, the filtering of the stuff we're already supposed to know about, the ERA grants, has still been a little slow to come down, and it's still very, very confusing for the state regulators when they're working with the individual school districts.
So do we know when that would be?
I don't know what it'd be. I
They're
assume
soon
the
to
superintendent may
submit,
know.
the state soon to submit its grant, its proposal, and then we'll find out what this first round of funding actually deals with. I know Steve has participated in a few conferences with the commissioner, and we've kind of explored one piece. There are 4 requirements for Race to the Top the states have to meet. We were looking at kind of the connection with Granite State College, And there was conversation today with secondary school. There were 5 board examination programs ranging from the Cambridge University program to International Baccalaureate, et cetera, and they were kind of stirring up interest about that. So you have to sign on for some pieces of that, but it's very wide open, and the state's going to submit its grant, and if we get funded, then districts will kind of follow after the fact. That won't help us with this particular budget. And notwithstanding the plan that you see before you, there's a gap of $100,000. And what I want to say to folks is that we were going to plan to meet with administrators on Tuesday. In fact, Steve and I said we wanted to go individually and go talk to each of the building administrators and get, have a conversation about what's necessary to get through the year so we don't interfere with instruction. So we need about a week's time to kind of do that, talk with the administrators, and then I think we're in a better situation.
And so at that point, would you come back to us with sort of a plan? With a plan?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think if, there are multiple, as Steve says, multiple moving parts here, from
Right.
substitutes to, but don't be fooled. Plan is one thing, it doesn't account for that gap
Right.
from the New Hampshire State Retirement System.
Right,
Right, which we have to make up.
the legislature.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
Thank you, Steve. So moving on to old business. So we're going to revisit for second reading all of these policies that are listed here under 9A. Right?
Yeah, so in your packet, you did a first reading of these 8 policies on December 8th, so they're for your consideration and approval. There have been no changes made since the last meeting regarding these policies. I don't know typically if you've approved them en masse, or you've gone down individually and recited them and taken a vote on each one of them.
Yes, Ken.
I'll make a motion to accept item A as a block under old business.
Second. Discussion.
I believe access to public records should be under new business. It's the very last policy in both old and
Yes,
new
it's-
business, and it's
It
listed.
should be a new policy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the first reading,
So we're ending at E, B, C, C.
It's the 7.
Yeah,
so it's new business, not old.
You are correct.
Okay.
Absolutely, 7 policies, my apologies.
So I just want to make sure that when we,
I'll amend the motion to reflect that it
Thank
will be
you.
the 7 items under old business A.
Okay.
I'll still second.
Second amended. Any further discussion? So you want, is that a roll call vote or just? Yeah,
Yes,
just
that's
policy, okay.
Lisa Sweet,
Yes.
Dexter Legg,
Yes.
Carol Chelman,
Yes.
Rebecca Emerson,
yes.
Ann Walker,
Yes.
Mitch Schuldman,
Yes.
Kent LePage,
Yes.
Leslie Stevens.
Yes.
Very good. So now we move on to the first reading of the policies under new business, which, that access to public records is already at the bottom of the second list also, so, okay.
And so to put these in context, the first 7 policies are required by law. They really go to, really largely secondary school, flexibility for principals, and teacher teams to basically deal with at-risk students and facilitate their graduation. It was part of the, addressing the dropout rate back in 2007 by the state legislature. So alternative learning plans, earning of credit, interdisciplinary credit, homework, advanced coursework, advanced placement courses, and extended learning opportunities, as well as instructional needs of students with different talents. All 7 of those are required by state law. 6 of them are following the DOE and New Hampshire School Boards Association sample policy. There've been no adjustment to that. The extended learning opportunity policy actually comes, Principal Collins reviewed a draft of that, and we made some adjustments, and essentially we're following the policy that's in place at Oyster River, which really limits students to 4 credits in their junior and senior year, 2 credits in their junior, 2 credits in their senior year. The other policies, resignation of a staff member, there is an error there. That first line in that policy should be stricken. It's really largely about resignation, and we had made an adjustment, and that first sentence should not be part of that policy. And then the last three were policies that came to us from the New Hampshire School Boards Association. You had current policy, but we kind of cleaned it up, and there were a couple of requirements in state law that were omitted from the policy. One is that you'd meet at least once every 2 months by law, and you're permitted to post notice of meetings on the website, so those are significant changes there. And we simplified the public commentary procedure. You had a dual process, 5 minutes, 3 minutes. We just made it 3 minutes across the board for 30 minutes and encouraged the public to participate. And the last one, again, was a change, a modest change there. And I appreciate Rebecca pointing that out. It's a new read, first reading tonight. So,
Yes, Ann.
If I could just offer some, I guess, suggestions on this group of policies. Maybe I should talk to the policy committee themselves because I don't want to extend the meeting. But, for example, there's an INAA, which is referenced in one of these policies as well, the extended learning opportunities. I believe it's on a different designation, IHBA, New Hampshire School Board policy. If you go to their online, there isn't a policy INAA. It's a, I mean, that's a small matter, but there are other little things like in policy BEA where they talk about a majority of the board shall constitute a quorum. There's no definition of quorum, and I know that in our policy work we've dealt a lot with the quorum that exists when the physical members are physically present versus an electronic quorum, who's eligible to vote, and that kind of thing. So there's no definition in that policy of those particular things. So there may be some updating that, even though New Hampshire School Board policy tries to update their policies as well. Some of that things, one of the policies that you just voted talks about, never talks about virtual and online relations between students and teachers. And so that makes that policy just a little bit behind the times. So, maybe any potential.
That last comment you made, which one are you referring to?
The policy, we designate the policy, it's your JICDAA, J being the designation for student policies, G is the designation for employee policies, so we stuck ours in G rather than in J, and it's under student relations, and we deal with, in number 3, it says staff members, and we changed ours to will refrain rather than shall not fraternize, will refrain, and we discuss, and we just mentioned in real or virtual environments, which is not, isn't brought up in that policy.
There was a conversation had by the policy subcommittee about that, and social networking, et cetera, and they made a conscious decision to.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
This is just a first reading, so we're going to need a motion to accept, and then have a conversation about some of them.
As a group, I'll make a motion.
Second.
As a block, okay.
For the block of 5 or 6 or whatever.
Okay,
Second.
okay. Questions, conversations? Yes, Rebecca?
Yeah, I have a question on the homework policy. There have been a lot of discussions and studies about how fruitful homework and different types of homework. So I really like the line that it must be viewed as purposeful, and I just want to make sure that that's something that we're going to continue to look at. 30 minutes of homework per class at any level, can be considered a lot if you have multiple classes. I just want to make sure that we're sort of going forward and really looking at education and looking that the homework that we do provide is good. So who's going to make sure it's purposeful? Who's going to take care of that?
I'd like to suggest that basically each school has a homework policy as well. And you take a look at what New Franklin has for their policy. This is the general overall policy, and then each school has their own.
So again, just to provide the context, it's required by state statute, curiously. I mean, so this is the sample policy provided by the New Hampshire school boards. And I don't think one could argue with it. It should be purposeful. It shouldn't be used for disciplinary purposes. And if a teacher's using it for grading purposes, it says that the teacher needs to explain that to both, the student and the family.
Right.
So I think philosophically, it's pretty tough to argue with you. Now you get into the mechanics at a grade level. Is it going to be 10 minutes per grade, 20 minutes second grade, 30 minutes third grade? Whatever the case may be, I do think that's a building.
And is that something that the curriculum council deals with? That what we do assign and the amount we assign is logical and makes sense and worthy of our students' time? Or is that just something that we trust the building administrators to do?
And I think you trust teachers there's some
And
variability
teachers,
there,
right.
because I think it's going to be hard to one size fits all in a building to say teachers have different, needs for assigning homework.
And is this something that, the PLCs and the communication between teachers, because if at the senior high level, 5 teachers assign 30 minutes or 20 minutes, that's a 9, 10 o'clock night, not to mention all the other things. And there is a growing awareness that might not be the way to go. And I just, I have no problem with the policy. I just want to make sure that it's something that is on people's radar, that what we do give them is not overwhelming, because there is, there are other activities, and I want to make sure that what we are giving them is beneficial to them. So I don't need an answer. I just want to make sure it's on.
Okay.
And then I did have another, the school board meeting policy.
Before you just do that,
Sure.
staying on homework for a
Yep.
second, does anyone, because I do have a question about homework. I guess the issue for me really is, it's not a question about the policy, but it has to do with homework, and if it's a part of a student's grade, then I think then the issue is there a consensus of sorts amongst, by grade level, for example, as to what percentage of a student's grade homework would be? So for example, if at the high school somebody says 40% of your grade is homework, well, that doesn't necessarily reflect learning. It just reflects the person's ability to follow through and do homework. So it's just a question, since we're talking about homework as a policy, that maybe people need to be mindful of that homework as a part of a grade, a high percentage doesn't do anybody any good. And I noticed, I looked at my daughters, for example, and they're low. They're like 10%, which seems to make sense. But I just think it's an issue people need to keep in the back of their minds. Yes, Rebecca.
And then my other question was on the school board meeting policy. They're held in public with the exception of non-public. And we often have these so-called non-meetings.
Covers it.
Say that one more time. Where are you?
The school board meeting policy. It's one of the, well, it's
Got it.
close to the end.
Yeah.
It says meetings of the school board are held in public with the exception of non-public.
Right.
We have non-meetings. Are they counted as non-public?
Non-meetings are really not a
includes-
meeting.
Yeah.
It's a meeting with council. It's really not a school, it's not.
So we don't need to cover ourselves to have,
That umbrellas it all. A non-meeting is a
non-public
non-public.
covers
Yep,
non-meeting?
non-public is the top of the umbrella that covers that.
Okay. That was it. Thank you.
Ann, did you have something?
I was just going to comment on the homework, that in terms of homework being graded, generally, it's a matter of is it done consistently type of thing, more so than the grade, but that varies.
Any other comments on any other policies? No? Seeing none, we'll take a vote on these as a block for first reading. Take a roll call.
Lisa Sweet?
Yes?
Dexter Legg?
Yes.
Carol Chelman?
Yes.
Rebecca Emerson?
Yes.
Ann Walker?
Yes.
Mitch Schulman?
Yes.
Kent LePage?
Yes.
Leslie Stevens?
Yep.
It's a vote.
It's a vote. Okay. So, committee updates. All we have on the docket is the JPC. For update.
Oh, yeah. So firstly, I'd like to welcome Leslie. I guess formally we'll do this tomorrow night at our next JBC meeting, but congratulations, Leslie. You'll be terrific.
I'm very excited, actually. I think this is really great.
So since the last update that Lisa gave you, the JBC met on December 16th. And at that meeting, we established a communications subcommittee, since we understand that communications to be such a significant part of the JBC. Lisa, in fact, is the chair of that. Eric Spear, Mary Ann List, and then McDonough are members of that committee. That subcommittee met earlier this month, and they'll be reporting out the first time at tomorrow night's JBC meeting. The group also established our 2010 meeting schedule, and effectively the committee will meet on the second and fourth Wednesdays of each month through 2010. And if there are need for other meetings, then they'll be established accordingly. The meetings are at 6:30, and generally they'll be held at Little Harbor. They'll be based on what the communications committee puts together. There will be specific project milestones where we'll hold those meetings here in the City Council so that we can televise those key events. And there may be other additional public-related, although these are all public, there may be other specific communication forums that will be put together, again, based on both the project schedule and the work of the communications subcommittee. At that meeting, the group also worked on both the roles and responsibilities of the committee as well as the project positions. That should be final tomorrow night. And when it is, then that will be made available to the school board and other members of the community. So what I would hope is that by next week we can circulate copies of that material to you all, and what that will lay out, in I think fairly clear terms, is the responsibilities of the committee, the key project positions, and the roles and responsibilities of those project positions. Let's see. The next thing that happened is that the committee recommended, and the City Council at an earlier meeting this month approved, Wentworth as the site to replace Alumni Field. And at tomorrow night's meeting, we will talk about next steps about that process. We've also launched the hiring process for our construction manager at risk. A subcommittee for that selection was established. They have met once, and they will be meeting again this Friday. Some of the same suspects, Lisa and Eric, are on that committee, along with Peter Middleton, Steve Parkinson, Don Hartley, and Susanna Woodland. Those last three individuals are obviously from the city. Lisa, Eric, and Peter Middleton are on the JBC. The RFQ was released, and we have responses to that, and that subcommittee will be beginning to evaluate those responses on Friday. At tomorrow night's meeting, we will report out to the subcommittee who responded to that RFQ. I won't do that now until that committee hears that information. And I would encourage anyone to come tomorrow night's meeting, because the JCJ Architects and Lisa DeStefano Architects will be there, and one of the agenda items we'll have is to talk about the project work plan that will cover much of 2010 at some level of detail. So I think that will give a sense to the committee as well as to the community, sort of what's going to happen in this project over the course of the next 10 to 12 months. Lisa, do you have anything to add?
I do not.
So if you have questions, I'll entertain questions.
Any questions about the middle school? So before we leave committees, what I was asking the superintendent is, we'd like to begin the process of having the standing committees, technology, we've had athletics, to convene. And perhaps the athletic committee worked on their charge last year. Is that you created the charges?
Sure.
Okay. So maybe what I could ask the superintendent to do is to work with all the committees, maybe to convene a standing committee, and then the committees can begin developing a charge. We can circulate, as an example, the athletic committee charge. Sure. Okay. Yes, Ken.
Just to follow up on that, I briefly talked with Steve Bartlett beforehand, and under the booster clubs, which really that as a whole for all booster clubs only meets once a year, we have established, hoping again on the weatherman to cooperate, February 1st at 6:30. Steve will have it go out to all board directors, Booster Club board directors, so that they will attend that. And again, that is not just athletics, that's all booster groups within the confounds of the school system. And it is highly requested that they attend.
February,
1st, and we said 6:30, right, Steve?
Yes.
okay. Okay.
Phil Boynton, I believe, has a item to share with the board.
Yes. I spoke to the board back in the fall discussing the class of 2010's senior gift. And just to reiterate, we are planning to re-landscape the main entrance to the school, and part of that will include a brick walkway, which we're calling a memory walk. And in it, you know, we're going to have personally engraved bricks, and I'm just offering up to any of you, if you'd like to have a brick, I have the packets right here, all the information is needed, and I'll just pass these around, and you can get them back to me as soon as you want. Thank you.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
So is there a dollar figure attached to how much you're trying to raise?
Yes. For a one line on the brick, it would be $25, a two line would be $30, and a three line would be $35.
I mean for the whole landscaping.
There is no
project.
No, there is no specific.
Okay,
no.
as much as you can.
Yeah, exactly.
Rebecca.
I love the idea of the memorial walk. And is this something that future classes or people could purchase a brick, or is it going to be reserved for members of the class of 2010, 2010?
It is open to anybody, past, future, anyone who wants a brick, they can be a part of it.
Wonderful, thank you.
I too.
You got two. Okay. So, just looking ahead for the next agenda, even though there's nothing listed here, Lisa reminded us that at some point in the not-too-distant future, we need to set a date for our next retreat. So keep that in mind. We'll talk about that at the next meeting. Bring your calendars, and we'll set that up for, is it usually
Saturday, are we still?
a weekend date? And
Yeah.
are we looking at sometime in the
Yeah.
summer?
Exactly.
We met in, okay.
We met in the summer before, so we should be meeting in the winter.
Okay, we'll figure it out. So, seeing nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
11 o'clock.